Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all of the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish but to fulfill, for truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be exalted great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
The light divine. And then out of the first reading, "Then let your light shine and rise in the darkness." And then out of the Gospel, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house." We'll return to that in just a moment, but I want to bring to your attention the life of a woman born in 1797 in New York, born as a slave, Isabella Farmer. And she lived all of her life as a slave. And by the time she was 22, she had been bought and sold 4 times. By that time, she had borne 5 children, which of course is what a slaveholder delights, so that they don't have to buy any more slaves. They're simply born and they own them. But at that point, when her 5th child was still an infant, she rose in the middle of the night and she fled her captivity and found a house of a Dutch family who belonged to the abolitionists who fought against slavery. And they took her in and they bought her freedom for $20. That's all it took. She could neither read nor write. Nevertheless, they were astounded by her mental acuity. She was very bright. She knew how to think things out. And so she went to New York City, and there she met William Lloyd Garrison, whose newspaper was fighting the fight for abolition. And she also met Frederick Douglass, who already had become a famous word. But she went far beyond just speaking against slavery. She pushed it to the limit. Not only did she want slavery borne away, but she fought for women's rights. And interestingly enough, even though Frederick Douglass and she were of like mind, Douglass didn't agree with her that even though free, a woman should vote. Interesting as you look at the annals of history, how people were thinking. Nevertheless, the abolitionists up front heard her fiery speeches against slavery, and her name was changed from Isabella Farmer to Sojourner Truth. And so she lived her life going around giving speeches just as Douglass had, and in 1864 she was invited into the White House to meet Abraham Lincoln. She was a formidable woman. She stood 6 feet tall, and she kind of frightened many men of my size by her very presence. And she lived her entire life fighting over against slavery. And even when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, later, 10 years later, when she went to enter a streetcar in New York, the conductor told her that she couldn't get on she was undaunted. She found a lawyer and she sued the man and she won. She also looked for the other 4 children who had been sold further into the South in slavery. She could only find one, her son. Immediately, she sued for his freedom and she won. And every time this happened, it was as if this bushel basket that hid the light of her power was released. And it shone with a brightness that could only be the grace of God. Throughout our history, we are people who are called to say, there is light everywhere, but the question is the bravery it takes to remove the bushel basket that covers it, and it happens in every generation. It happens so deeply here in the United States in the form of slavery that every time something like that happens, a new light shines. I take my own father into that because I would think that my dad was like most people who grew up north in Massachusetts. It was just taken for granted that what the people down south do is kind of reprehensible, but there wasn't much you could do about it until that time when he saw on the television what was happening for the freedom marchers. First, the 3 boys, 2 white, 1 black, who were killed, taken from a car, and they were shot to death and buried in an earthen dam. You will somehow, if you ever saw the movie Mississippi Burning, see a reconstruction of that very story and the horrors of it all, and how the retaliation was brought. And justice did come for all of those who were involved, went to jail. And in their jailing, a bushel basket was pulled off and new light shone. There was a possibility. And you will recall the 4 little girls who were killed in the bombing of a Baptist church. And if you did see, you will see some people who were accused of doing that, and they sat outside a courtroom, all of these white men, and they were laughing because they knew that no white jury would ever convict them, and indeed they did not. And it was only years later when they became older, somewhat feeble men, that they were found guilty and they went to jail. And people said, oh, how sad at that age to go to jail. It wasn't sad at all, it was justice. And when justice comes along, a bushel basket is lifted and new light is seen. Now, as we look upon everything that comes up in this world, all of those things happen. I can well remember studying Susan B. Anthony, who, by the way, became a friend of Sojourner Truth. White, her, black, her, coming together in total agreement. And in their conversation, new light sprung forth. Neither one of them saw the possibility of women voting until they were long gone and finally came into vogue, so to speak, in 1920, and that amendment was given. Every time a light is hidden under a bushel basket, it needs to be removed. The problem is that sometimes in our thinking, it is very difficult for us to do that because we don't always understand that the light has been there all along. Consider what the Old Testament said. Your light will shine forth. Consider what is going on here in Jesus' analogy. No one lights a light and puts it under a bushel basket to let it shine out. Now, in our baptism, every time we baptize here in any most Christian church, the water is poured over the child's head, or it could be an adult, baptizing you in the name of the Father and the Son, and we say the person's name. And then one of the next things we do, we light a candle from the Paschal candle, hand it to the parents or to the person, and these words are spoken right out of this gospel. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So that it is true, you see, that in our baptism, even though we may not remember it, a candle was lit. There was a flame. And it was never meant to be put under a bushel basket and be hidden. It was always meant to shine and be a factor of how we think and what we do in life. And The problem is, as we get older, we don't even realize that that light can be hidden, because we become victims of current thought. And we say, well, I guess this is just how life is, until someone has the courage to lift that basket up, and there's a brilliance of light that you just can't get out. Now, in my father's case, he watched television, and what he saw in the hosing and the dogs, and he said, I never realized it was that bad. And at that moment in my father's life was the realization that it isn't just the way it should be, it was the way it should not be. All of these things add up. And in our lives, we have to see what's going on in the world and say to ourselves, does this make sense? Is there justice involved here? Or are people going into bondage of some kind of shunned faith? I think in my own life, I've never really felt that I was in any type of bondage. But it was only until, for example, in the 60s, when I was in my early 20s, that I realized that there were people in bondage. And I found this out in an interesting way, because sitting next to me in the 11th and 12th grade, the seats were two together, separated two together. And I sat next to Kenny Laster. And Kenny was a black guy, my age, and we got to know each other because we were both interested in music. At that time, I was an organist in the Catholic Church. He was a piano player in the Baptist Church. Nice combination. But the fun of it was we started finding out what the similarities were. We found out that his minister and my priest were kind of quirky people, and we would laugh at the mistakes they made. We had this bantering going back and forth. And we talked about what hymns do you play, and he couldn't understand some of the Latin hymns that we did. And I found out some of the Baptist hymns that he did, kind of rollicking and free will. And we once said to each other, why don't we get together with my hymnal and yours and compare and see what the differences were. And it sounded like a good idea, except that he lived in the area of Springfield, Massachusetts, wonderfully redlined as that's where black people lived. And I had lived in an all-white community in East Long Meadow where there wasn't a single black person. And even though we talked about that possibility, we never did it, and we knew it would never happen. Because we refused to cross any lines. We refused to take that chance that something good might come out of it. I always regretted it. I hope he did too. Because what was happening is there was a bushel basket under the freedom that we both had, and we refused to remove it. We are called by the gospel of Jesus to be people who think differently. And he calls here something very interesting. In John's gospel it says Jesus is the light of the world. You all know that. But here in the gospel of Matthew, this Jesus who says he is the light of the world tells the disciples, you are the light of the world. And now it takes on a whole different complexion, doesn't it? Now he is inviting this light of the world, this Jesus saying, I invite you to be disciples who are the light of the world. Now the big problem here is, how do you decipher that? Where do you see injustice? You don't have to look far. But the problem is, as individuals, we may say to ourselves, I as a single person can't do much about that. But it all starts entertaining in your mind that there is a possibility that you could change your mind about something you have taken for granted that hides the light of truth. It can happen, and it has happened. No one in the South ever thought in the mid-19th century that slavery would ever go away, but it did. Nobody in 1965, when Lyndon Johnson was president, thought they would ever have civil rights legislation, but it did. And despite the fight he had to do, and everything he went through to make it happen, it did. Now, since that time, our global experience has expanded because of our communications abilities. Our phones, our televisions, constant newscasts. And if you heard about it this morning, you heard over on the other side of the world, in Thailand, 26 people murdered because of a man who was upset about something. Now, what we used to think was exclusive to the United States has found its way into other countries. That when you're upset and you think you have been hit against, you take that out on other people and you murder them. That, of course, is a huge bushel basket hidden over the light that all people are created as children of God. And it does not matter what religion or what faith they are, what color they are, or what they do in their lives. This is a given freedom by God. And when it is violated in any other part of the world, we have to, at least in sorrow, recognize that there is a light that has been distinguished. So now, you heard the light. Now you heard it in the Old Testament. Now you hear it from Jesus. The only thing left is to be people who take, by the way, your prologue, apply it to where you may see injustice and say, it is at least worthwhile for me to say, is this a light that's hidden? And if you come to that conclusion, then you have to say to yourself, I have been told that through my baptism, that I am a human being called to be a light in the world. It may be difficult to do. You may have to join organizations that fight against injustice. There's little you can do alone, but you never know. After all, Sojourner Truth, born into slavery, bought and sold 4 times, became a light to the world. Who would have known? If that is so, how much more so we, who have been given this gospel this morning, and know that we are people who are called to take bushel baskets off injustice, so that the light that comes from that light may fill the room of the church, or your home, or an entire nation. And it is a good cause, well worth the effort. In the name of Christ, who is the light of the world.